Welcome everyone to today's kickoff and information session for the Affordable Housing Strategy Update. We're very excited to have you all here tonight, both in the room and virtually. And we're really excited to be able to accommodate folks both here at City Hall and in our Zoom room. We're also really excited to be able to accommodate some different languages tonight. So we do have interpretation available on Zoom in Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish. And so if you would like to participate via Zoom in a language other than English, join a language channel by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and choosing the language you want to listen in.
Then please translate it supposed to be outside because they talking, you cannot listen. Translate it supposed to be outside.
So if you're having audio issues, I will speak a little bit closer to the mic to make sure that everyone can hear. For those in the room, just so you know, if you need to use the facilities or the restrooms, you can go down the hall to the right, all the way down, turn the right-hand side, and the restrooms will be on the right there. We are going to have a question and answer portion at the end of tonight's presentation. And so we are going to ask that you submit your questions in writing. And so for folks in the room, we have some volunteers who have note cards and pens. And so if you have a question during the presentation, just raise your hand. We'll bring a note card over to you, and you can just wave your note card when you want them to come collect it, and we'll have our volunteers come collect it. For folks on Zoom, you can enter questions into the chat and using the Q&A function, and you do that just by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. For folks on Zoom, if anyone is having a hard time and needs some assistance during the presentation, just type into the chat and we'll have a volunteer try and assist you. So that's it for logistics, folks. Really excited to have so many interested participants here tonight. And we actually have a lot to cover on our agenda. So to start, I want to introduce you to the staff team. First off, my name is Hannah Bondmiller. I use she or they pronouns, and I'm a senior planner at the City of Bellevue. And I'm the project manager for this Affordable Housing Strategy Update. I also want to introduce you to some of the other folks on our team. Here today we have Sabrina Velarde. She's a program coordinator on the Affordable Housing team and is supporting this project. We also have Brooke Broad with us. She's our engagement lead and is amazingly helping us coordinate this event tonight. I want to also just call out, we have several other staff people here who are volunteering their time. Huge thank you to those staff people. And we also have a couple members of senior leadership. So Linda Abe and Bianca Siegel are also here with us tonight. And I think I saw some planning commissioners and maybe a human service commissioner in the room. If any of you are Board or Commission members, you just want to raise your hand or give a little wave. Thanks for joining us. For today's agenda, we're going to be setting some context on some commonly defined terms that are used in affordable housing, as well as talking about some of the affordable housing work that the city has already done. And then the main event for tonight is talking about the upcoming work in 2025 that we're going to be doing to update the city's affordable housing strategy. And we will save plenty of time for questions for this group. We have lots of folks both in the room and online, and so we'll save plenty of time to make sure we can get through those questions. As I said, we are taking questions in writing. We won't have any kind of public comment, and so if you want to write a question, please raise your hand. We'll get you a card or type it in that Q&A function on Zoom. So before we get started tonight, we actually want to hear a little bit from you. We showed you the staff in the room. Now we want to see who else is joining us today. And so this is the part where we ask you to take out your electronic device so you can participate with us via Mentimeter, which is an online tool that allows us to ask interactive questions during the presentation. So to join Mentimeter, you can either scan the QR code on the screen, or you can go to menti.com and enter that code 53353152. Okay, I saw some phones snapping photos. Everyone's getting logged into Mentimeter. I'm seeing thumbs up. And so let's start with our first question today. So we want to know a little bit about your relationship to Bellevue. And so the first question we have for you is, what is your relationship to Bellevue? Do you live in Bellevue? Do you work here but live somewhere else? Or maybe you live somewhere else, but you come here to shop, dine, or play. So it looks like we have lots of Bellevue residents here, with a number of folks who actually just work in Bellevue. Hang on a couple more minutes for folks who want to chime in. Wow, it looks like we had 60 plus folks respond to the question. Majority of us live in Bellevue, but we have a good chunk of folks here today who actually work in Bellevue but don't live here. So I'll move on to our next question, which is, what is your current living situation? So regardless of where you live, we'd like to learn a little bit more about it. So the question or the answers you can respond to are if you own your home in Bellevue, either a house or a condo, or maybe you rent in Bellevue. Another option you could pick is, I would like to live in Bellevue. I don't currently live here, but I can't afford it. You can also say maybe folks are without housing right now, or maybe none of those apply to you and you're in the other category. So it looks like we have about over 20 people who own a house or condo in Bellevue, and it looks like the second highest option is a lot of people want to live in Bellevue, but they can't find a house, condo, or apartment that they can afford. Awesome. I'll hang on just one moment here to get our last responses in. Awesome. Thanks, folks. Really cool to see who's in the room. It looks like we have a mix of Bellevue residents and folks who want to be Bellevue residents. Okay, for our next question, we want to hear a little bit about housing affordability. That is why we're here tonight, and so we want to hear a little bit about how housing is affordable to you. So over the past 12 months, how easy or hard has it been for you to meet your monthly housing expenses? We have a range between very easy to very difficult. And if you're not sure, you can also pick that option. Looks like we have a lot of range on here. So it seems like the majority of folks in the room are saying it's somewhat easy to pay my housing costs, but it also looks like we have a good number of folks who are having trouble paying them too. Awesome, thanks for everyone for participating. And final question for the night. So tonight we're going to be talking about this next year of strategy work that we're going to do on affordable housing. And we want to hear from you about why this work is important to you and what values you think that the city should be focusing on as we go through this process. And so if you can enter up to 3 values that you think are important that the city should be looking at while we are doing our affordable housing strategy. And so values are like fundamental traits or beliefs, things like equity, innovation, integrity. These are all different values we have and hold, and each value is different to each of us. Okay, we have some values coming in. Safety looks like a big one. Several people talked about safety as a value. Looks like we also have cost, location, and equity as big values that are showing up here. Oh, it's awesome to see everybody's contributions. Let's hold on one moment while folks get their answers in. Let's see what rises to the top. Okay, it kind of seems like there's a theme: safety, equity, cost, location. Those are all really important values to folks in this group, and appreciate you sharing that and letting us see, those are obviously core values, but there's a lot of different values that people are putting in, and so really appreciate you sharing that. So that was our interactive exercise for today. You can put your phones down, and I'll take one moment and just switch back to our presentation tonight. Well, thank you all for participating. I hope you feel a little bit more oriented to who's in the room with you. And now we're going to move on to the topic of the night, which is affordable housing.
Yeah, before you speak, you know what is mean common sense? Expression common sense.
Sorry, Mr. Zimmerman, we're not taking questions at this portion. If you'd like to submit a question.
What is mean common sense?
I'm sorry, Mr. Zimmerman, we're not answering questions at this time. If you'd like to.
Ask you, you know what is mean common sense?
Mr. Zimmerman, I'm sorry, we're going to proceed with the presentation. If you have questions you'd like to. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Great, well, let's go on to the next portion of our presentation. Sometimes affordable housing can seem a little technical and wonky. That's oftentimes because we have a lot of jargon that we use that not everyone has the same understanding of. And so before we get started today, I just want to talk about some of the common terms that we use in affordable housing so that we have all the same basis of information going forward. So the three terms I want to focus on today are area median income, or AMI, housing cost burden, and affordable housing. So for area median income, we can think about a community as a range of incomes from the lowest income in a community, usually $0, to the highest income in a community. And that center point between that high and low point, that's our area median income. And that's the very middle income in a community, and it's the halfway point between that highest income and that lowest income. And for Bellevue, we actually base our AMI on a larger area. It's based on not just Bellevue, but all of King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. And so in 2024, the area median income for a 4-person household in Bellevue was $147,400, which means that there was exactly half households making less than that amount, and half of our households who make more than that amount. And when we're talking about housing affordability, it does affect all of us, but we're really focused on those folks who are making below median income because they have less money to be able to spend on housing expenses. So as we're looking at those below median income households, they're not all the same. They actually have different needs and resources within that below median range. And so we use different terms to talk about those different incomes below area median income. So we use different terminology that refers to how far below the area median they are. And so these terms of 0 to 30% AMI, 30 to 50% AMI, 50 to 80% AMI, these are things that we really frequently refer to in our affordable housing conversations, and it's terms that I'll use throughout this presentation. So another key term I want to discuss is housing cost burden. Housing cost burden is when households spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And so why this is important is because when you spend more of your money on housing costs, you have less money to spend on other expenses and needs. Oftentimes, the housing cost begins to crowd out other expenses. And so households that are not cost burdened often have more money to spend on other necessities and luxury items. When households spend more than 50% of their income on housing, it's called severely cost burdened. And when you get to that point of spending about half of your income on housing, you really don't have a lot more money to be able to spend on other items. There are things like taxes and transportation. Those expenses don't change, they stay the same. And so what ends up being impacted is things like your food, your health care, and other costs that you incur. So the last term I want to talk about is affordable housing, because this is a term that can mean different things in different contexts. But when we talk about affordable housing in this presentation and this plan, we're talking about housing that is income restricted or reserved to folks of a certain income. And so that means that you have to make a certain income or below to be able to qualify for that unit. In addition, you can't just have a certain income in that unit. You also have to make it so they're spending a reasonable portion of their income on rent. So you have to be affordable, the rent has to be less than 30% of that household's monthly housing costs. So you would have that household not be cost burdened. So it's a lot of numbers and jargon, but I really want to bring us back to the point that when we're talking about affordable housing, we're not just talking about incomes and rents, we're talking about people and people in our community and friends and families that we have. So I just want to share a couple examples of folks who need or use affordable housing in Bellevue. So this is George. George is a senior and he lives in Bellevue and he's on disability insurance. He has a low fixed income, which means he's making about 30% of the area median income. And George can only afford a monthly housing cost of about $463 a month. George, right now, he's living in his car and he's on a wait list for senior affordable housing. We also have Hassan and Mina. Hassan and Mina, they're recently retired homeowners, and they want to age in place in Bellevue. Their combined retirement makes them at about 60% of the area median income, and they can afford their existing housing cost of about $1,800. But right now, they're worried about what that cost is going to look like in the future. They're worried about rising property taxes, and also if they're going to be able to age in place in their home and if they can afford to downsize and stay in Bellevue. We also have Shanae. Shanae is a single mother and a home healthcare aide. She works part-time and she earns about 40% of the area median income. Her and her child were actually able to move to Bellevue because they got into affordable housing, and she's really excited that her child is able to attend Bellevue School District. So while George, Hassan, and Mina, and Shanae, these are not exactly real people in Bellevue. They are very real stories that we've heard in Bellevue, and the stories that we hear about people struggling to find, afford, and stay in housing that meets their needs here. So I want to build on these stories and the people that we're talking about as we go into this next section, when we talk about the Affordable Housing Strategy Project. It's not just a project we're undertaking. We're not just building buildings, we're building homes for people. So before I discuss some of the past work that the city has done on affordable housing, I want to start talking about what is an affordable housing strategy. It's kind of this, term that doesn't offer a lot of context or clarity. So the affordable housing strategy, it's a plan that we use at the city to map out our short-term actions to work on affordable housing to increase the number of affordable housing units in Bellevue. And while we are looking at that income-restricted affordable housing, we're also going to be thinking about things like housing stability, keeping people in their homes, access to affordable housing so that you're able to get into those affordable homes, and making sure that there's affordability in the overall market. And while this is a plan, it's not just a list of actions. We are focused on implementation. So we're going to be looking at what actions do we do when, and how much money do we need to be able to accomplish that. So I think just as important as what the affordable housing strategy is what it's not. So this is not an opportunity to redo or replace the existing work that's going on at the city. Some of you may be plugged into some of the other projects that are happening at Bellevue. There's a lot of work going on middle housing, on our Wilburton area. Those projects are ongoing. They're going to finish up, and this strategy is going to build on that work and not replace it. This is also not an analysis. We're not necessarily going to be looking at and assessing housing needs in this document. The city did a comprehensive housing needs assessment in 2022, so we'll be building off that existing analysis in this work. We also wanted to mention that this strategy, it's not a statutory plan, and that's something that we have to do from the state. It's something that we're opting to do voluntarily as a city. And why that's important is that statutory plans, they go to our planning commission, and the planning commission recommends it. This plan is not going to go to planning commission, it's going to go straight to our council. So just some information for you all. We also wanted to share that this plan isn't going to make everything happen at once. There is going to be some work that needs to happen after. So for example, if there is a recommendation to revise the code or do something that is going to be more substantial, there's likely going to be a follow-up process that will actually work through that code revision through a land use code amendment process. And finally, this is not a document that we print out and we set on the shelf and we pat ourselves on the back. This is something that's going to be informing work plans at the city across departments. So the intent is to have this implementation plan feed into the work that the city is doing over the next 7 years. So now that we're familiar with the affordable housing strategy, I wanted to provide some background on the work that the city has already done. So let's go back in time to 2017. I don't know how many of you were in Bellevue at 2017, but it was a very different place, and how we thought about housing and housing affordability was very different. But back in 2017, Bellevue began to recognize that this was an issue that we needed to pay attention to. And so they created and adopted the city's first affordable housing strategy. And that strategy had 5 overarching strategies and 21 actions. After we completed the work of the affordable housing strategy, we developed another work program called Next Right Work in 2022. And this was another set of actions focused on increasing housing affordability and supply in Bellevue. Both the 2017 Affordable Housing Strategy and Next Right Work, all of those actions that we identified in there, almost all of them are complete, and there's a couple that are still in progress but on track to finish work this year. So it's really exciting to look back and say, we actually accomplished what we set out to do. And as part of this work to update the affordable housing strategy, we did look back at what we accomplished. And so we did put together a report that summarized all of the actions that we did to implement the affordable housing strategy and what impact they had. What did we get out of all of this work that we did? So that is a document that's available online. As part of that 2017 strategy, the City Council said, we don't want to just have a list of actions. We want to have a goal to know what we're trying to build towards. And so at that time, the council adopted a target to build or preserve 2,500 affordable housing units. And all of the implementation efforts we undertook in the last 7 years helped us achieve that goal. In 2024, we went back to council and said, we've effectively met that 2,500 units of produced or preserved affordable housing, and now we're looking at what's next. So this work on the affordable housing strategy and the Next Right work, it really generated a strong momentum in housing focus at the city of Bellevue. And so we actually have some ongoing and recently completed projects that we wanted to highlight. First off, last year we adopted our comprehensive plan. This is a long-range planning document that the city uses to guide all of our work, and it was really strongly focused on housing. So that's a great basis for us as we're updating the strategy. We also have some really exciting work happening on some city-owned sites. For the folks in the development community in the room, we are working to advertise 2 city parcels for affordable housing in Bel-Red and Wilburton. So we're using our city resources to be able to make sure there's affordable housing in those transit-oriented development districts. And we also just see an affordable housing priority with our council. This is something that's top of mind for them, and we're really excited for that support. So that was the background, and now I want to move on to talk about the work ahead of us. And, I want to also talk about why we are doing this update now. We have an existing affordable housing strategy. Why redo the work? So there's a couple of reasons for that. First, as I mentioned, we did a big update to our comprehensive plan that gave us a lot of new direction on housing. And so we have a lot of new housing policy that we want to be able to work to create actions to implement. We've also just been able to accomplish a lot of the work that we set out to do. So now that we're wrapping up those projects, we want to look to what's next. We have also last year engaged with our council to establish a new affordable housing target, which I'll talk about a little bit more in just a second, but that's going to be a new goal for production and preservation for us that we're going to be able to look at and use as a goal for this plan. So the work ahead of us. This is what we're going to be taking on over the next year. We're going to be working to identify city strategies that we can implement in the next 7 years to help us achieve our affordable housing target and to increase housing stability, accessibility, and overall affordability in Bellevue. And in terms of this process, we've done a lot of housing work at the city. We've had a lot of conversations with folks about affordable housing. And we want to build on that work. We don't want to go back and ask the same questions, but we also know that all of you are very interested in this process and want to be involved in identifying our next set actions. So I want to show you where we're headed. What is our goal for the next 10 years and for this plan to accomplish? And so I mentioned that council established a new affordable housing target for the effort that we're undertaking right now. And that affordable housing target is based on needs in the community by income, and it's really looking at what our needs are over the next 10 years. And so we used a methodology to look at what we're planning for in terms of growth, and then looking at, of that growth, what is the different need by income levels. And what we saw was that we estimate that about 5,700 units will need to be affordable to those making under 80% AMI in the next 10 years. And so that's our goal. We are going to set out to build or preserve 5,700 affordable units in the next 10 years to meet that need. Something that's new as part of this target is that we're not just looking at affordable housing as one chunk. we're looking at those income bands that I mentioned and looking at the needs within those. So you can see that we are setting a goal for our extremely low income, our very low income, and our low income households to make sure that we're serving all of the need and not just the top of it. And we show this slide and folks say, well, what does that mean? How well are we doing? This is an ambitious target. This is going to mean that Bellevue is going to have to double our rate of producing affordable units, and we're really going to have to focus on those deeply affordable units. So a couple of key elements that I want to talk about as part of the strategy. So first is, we're not doing this work in the vacuum. This is an update. We have an existing strategy to build off of. And yet we know that the market today and the needs around affordable housing are very different. So we want to build on that progress, document it, and set bold objectives for the future. We're also going to be looking at that new policy guidance we have in our comp plan and other policy documents and thinking about how we can take them from the high-level policy into actual actions that we can do and implement at the city. And then lastly, it's very important for us to make sure that we hear from all of the folks in the community, but we pay particular attention in reaching folks who are most impacted by housing issues. Housing and affordable housing has a legacy of disproportionate and disparate impacts in the community, and it's really important for us that those folks who actually struggle with meeting their housing needs are part of the process to decide how we're going to fix it. So we are still really early on in this process. We are only in our second phase, which is our launch phase. This is the time where we are getting people excited about the affordable housing strategy work that we're doing at the city. And we also want to provide more information and education opportunities to folks so that they can participate in the upcoming work over the course of this next year. And so right now we're focusing on level setting and building our audience. The rest of this year, we're going to be looking at how do we assess the different actions that we're considering, and then how do we prioritize those actions into a recommendation for our city council. We're planning on adopting this plan before the end of the year. So come November, we're hoping our city council will consider and act on the work that we do. That was the boring part, folks, and now we're to the fun part. I didn't see a lot of hands come up in the room as I was talking, so now is your chance. If you want a note card to ask your question, please raise your hand in the room. For folks online, we would love for you to open up that Q&A function and drop your chats in there. And we're going to just take 1 second as I get my wonderful colleagues to come up here and help assist us with the Q&A portion. And as we're waiting for that, just a couple of things. We have a lot of folks here tonight, and we want to hear from as many people as possible. And so what we're going to be doing is we are going to try and group similar questions so that we can answer all of the questions that are similar at the same time. We're also going to be alternating between in-person and online. So we'll probably do maybe 1 or 2 questions from in the room, 1 or 2 questions online, and go back and forth so that we're hearing from both groups of folks.
I can start, Hannah, because we have a number of questions
Great.
that are related to AMI.
Okay.
And so some of them are, why Bellevue is Bellevue? Why do we focus on the greater King County and other neighboring counties? Why is Pierce County included when we're calculating AMI? So can you talk a little bit about like why we group things together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so area median income is a measure that's actually published by, I believe it's the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So it is a statistic that is calculated and published by the federal government. And so because of that, we don't decide what the area is. It's decided at a more macro scale. We do have information about Bellevue-specific income. We can look at Bellevue's median income and understand more about what households are actually earning within our city. The value of AMI is that it gives us a measure of a relative measure to understand affordability across the area. So while the median income in Bellevue is very different than the median income in Renton, which is where I used to work, which is why it's my example, it allows us to look at within that market to have similar measures of affordability that we can use. And so when we talk about income and AMI, we don't want to use that as the only measure. We do also want to be looking at some of those Bellevue-specific information.
If anybody is ready with their cards, I can start taking them. Actually, we have one question. Who can apply for affordable housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so affordable housing, it does depend on the specific building that you're applying to. There are different qualifications depending on the actual property that you're interested in. And so you'll want to check out those qualifications. Generally, affordable housing can be available to folks making under the area median income and is usually focused on folks making below 80% of the area median income. We have out on our information table out there actually some resources that folks can grab. It has a chart of the area median income. So if you're like, I don't know where I fall in. Can I qualify for affordable housing? You can go look at that chart out there, find your household income, and see where you fall depending on how many people are in your home.
Great. I kind of have some that are a little bit along the same line. That could be
Yeah.
a bit of a follow-up question. Does somebody's status of living with a disability also impact how they might qualify or what kind of housing that is affordable available to that? Are there other decisions besides somebody's income that goes into this?
Yeah, so there can be other qualifications for different affordable units. In the case of ability, there may be specific units that are reserved for folks with disabilities that they can occupy. Or there may be just units that are designed to be more accessible, so have those universal design features. There is not always a guarantee that the person who goes into an ADA unit has a disability, so there is sometimes a mismatch there. There's also sometimes qualifications for other things, such as units reserved for folks who are formerly homeless or veterans. So there is some certain qualifications depending on how those units may be funded.
So
I
we,
have a small question.
Can you write it down for us, Mr. Zimmerman?
I'm talking to you. My English not so good. I want to speak. Can I do it?
Unfortunately, we are just doing it in a written format to give everyone the same time.
Question very simple. You like
Mr.
to
Zimmerman,
attend
this
before.
is the
You
second
like
time
to
that I've
attend
asked you
before.
to please,
You will
please,
like for another
Mr.
10.
Zimmerman, we're going to
This
have
is
to ask you to
exactly,
leave if you're not
I
going
have
to
also
be able to
sample
participate
here every
respectfully.
time. I expert in joker
Yeah.
and liar. And you need to understand.
Mr. Zimmerman, we're going to ask you to leave so that everyone else can participate as well.
Understand what is going on when you go deep inside. From you can go deep inside. Nobody. No, this guy talking and talking and talking. You know to stop it.
so I have a couple of questions here that are actually a little bit similar, and they relate to resources and subsidy. So generally, my apologies. Is this better? Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes?
There we go.
We can hear me now? Okay, great. I feel like the Verizon person from those commercials. Okay, so the question is really related to resources. So it's a little bit of a two-parter. It's how do you intend to fund this strategy? And generally, how do you, I had it in front of me. Oh, there we go. How do you expect to create low-cost housing with high-cost regulations?
So the actual strategy itself, the work we're doing right now was funded in the last budget cycle by City Council. So we have money to do the planning work ahead of us. What that question might have been getting to is, how are we going to pay for all of the work after we do the planning? And that's going to be one of the actions that we're thinking about as part of this strategy is we know we're going to need more money to build these affordable units and to meet that new target. And so we're going to be thinking about new revenue sources, both at the local level and then how can we advocate better at the state and federal level to make sure that they're also funding affordable housing. And then, sorry, the second question?
The second question was generally like what are you going to do with the resources, the limited resources that we have? So how are you going to subsidize all of the units that we intend to create?
Yeah, so I think part of the process that we're undergoing is thinking about what priorities. There is a lot of affordable housing need out there, and I think we would love to live in a world where we could meet all of those needs, but we only have a limited amount of resources, and so we are going to have to think about trade-offs. Do we want to focus on specific segments of the population? Are there specific needs that we think are very concerning in our community that we want to prioritize and address? And so those are some of the things that we're going to be thinking about as we think about where our money is going to be going.
Great. I have some additional kind of income qualification related questions. So I'll get to some of them. And one of that really has to do with Section 8 tenants. And because they need assistance to limit their housing cost pockets to out of 30%, where do they fall? Are they still in affordable housing? What is that? Where are they falling for Section 8?
Yeah,
And maybe just for people at home who don't know what Section 8 is, if you can define that.
Yeah, great. So Section 8, it's a housing choice voucher that's issued by housing authorities across the country. And so this is it's called a portable housing voucher, and it allows you to get affordable housing on the private market. And so how it works is basically the housing authority or the federal government is going to cover the gap between a affordable rent for the occupant and what it's priced at the market. And so I would consider a Section 8 or a housing choice voucher affordable housing, but their actual their AMI might vary depending on how much income they actually have.
And just one more thing on AMI here. Is there a revised income criteria to qualify affordable housing, and does it change every year? So how does that get updated?
Great question. So AMI does change. It is an annual published statistic, so it changes annually. And over the last several years, we see it going up quite fast in our area, largely because we have a lot of new high earners who are coming into our region. And so, that does change over time. And so, your AMI today may not be what it is next year. And so being able to stay up to date on those qualifications is really important.
So I have one question related to tracking. Will you track new units separately from preserved units? And this is strongly recommended by the question asker.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So we have all of these affordable units in Bellevue. Do we know where they are? Do we know how affordable they are? Yes, this is something that we do try and track and maintain at the city. We do try and keep an inventory of all of our affordable units. And so we do actually have in that information whether they were units that were created like from new construction, the building, just came up off the ground and the doors opened, or if it's from preservation. An example would be if we went out and if a developer went and bought a building and then used funding to restrict those rents. So we do track new construction and preservation differently. Sometimes we talk about them the same, but we have the ability to parse them out.
I have a couple more policy-specific questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So one person would like to know if all 3 families mentioned in the presentation example would qualify for the housing that we are discussing today. And another person would like to know if we are considering rental caps or land banking as different strategies.
Yeah, so the examples that I showed of George, Mina and Hassan and Shanae, they all make under 80% AMI, so they likely can qualify for affordable housing. The challenge is if there are open units that they can get into. Affordable housing is very in high demand, and so while they could potentially qualify, the challenge is, are there available units for them to live in? And referring to the second question about rent caps and land banking, so rent caps is a policy that would say landlords can only raise their rent by a certain amount. In Washington, local jurisdictions don't have the authority to set rent caps. That's actually something that would have to change at the state level before we could consider it locally. In terms of land banking, I don't know if everyone knows this, but land in Bellevue is very expensive. It is really expensive, and it's likely only going to keep getting more expensive because we're in a really attractive community and market. And so the concept of land banking is if we buy a piece of land today, it's going to be more expensive in the future, and we can use that extra value to our benefit. And so that is something that we're thinking about. And right now we're thinking about land banking in terms of our city-owned sites, but there's possibilities for thinking about how can we acquire new sites and hold them and then use them in the future, either by selling them or developing housing on them.
All right. This is also maybe a little bit on the policy or planning side. Is there a possibility to add permanently affordable home ownership as a priority to help guide the city to be more intentional about home ownership opportunities?
Yeah, this is a great question. So as we saw, we actually had a lot of folks in the room who already own homes in Bellevue. But what we actually hear a lot in the community is people who own homes here bought them a long time ago when they were more affordable. If you're looking to try and buy a home in Bellevue now, there are not a lot of options, especially if you're making the area median income or below. And so homeownership is a very important priority for the city, and I think we're thinking about different tools and how we can get there. What we've seen historically is Bellevue's really building multifamily housing and our multifamily affordable housing. And so when we think about opportunities for folks, not just to rent an affordable home, but how can they buy that and gain equity as well, we're going to be looking at different opportunities within this strategy to see where we can prioritize that.
Great. And then just to maybe kind of going back a little bit to our target, we have somebody here who wants to know, is the new affordable housing target going to be the King County countywide planning policy, estimated housing need, or has that been determined by a local method?
Well, we have somebody online who is tuned into these planning conversations. So the methodology that we used for the Bellevue affordable housing target is a Bellevue-specific methodology. And what that question was referencing is that King County also looked at need in communities across the county and assigned numbers based on their methodology. And so while we are paying attention to what the county did and we're making sure that we plan and accommodate for those housing units, what we're focusing on in the short term is based on a Bellevue needs assessment.
So I have a couple questions about data.
Yay.
Our data. The 2025 handout sets forth some facts. Where do we find the source of these statements? Is it Bellevue Community Data? Is it on the city's website? Where can we find that information?
Yeah, great question. So on that brochure, several of the facts say see Bellevue Community Data. And this is actually a web page on the city's website that has a ton of information, not just the things that were in that brochure. And so if you're interested in digging into the sources of that, you can Google Bellevue Community Data, go to that data portal and look at some of that information yourself. I wouldn't be able to say it off the top of my head, but I think most of that data probably originally comes from the census, and we just package it at Bellevue and publish it online as well.
And then the second part to that person's question is, do Bellevue residents assist in developing the city's plans for affordable housing? So will there be opportunities for Bellevue residents and possibly for folks who don't live here but would like to live here?
Yeah, great question.
I'm sorry. No, the first part was your question. My apologies. I combined two questions.
My second question, and it asks about Bellevue residents determine this or non-Bellevue.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes.
I might have missed the first part of the question, though.
The first part of the question is, do Bellevue residents assist in developing the city's plans for affordable housing?
Yes, so the event today is our first kickoff event for folks to participate in this planning process. We do plan over the course of the year to have more opportunities for folks to get involved. And what we're thinking is we're likely going to have some focus groups with our different stakeholders, as well as having future information sessions for the public and having an online open house where you can go in and dig into some of the recommendations when we get to that point in time. We want to hear from Bellevue residents. We also want to hear from folks who don't live here who would like to live in Bellevue. We know that not everybody who is able or who works here, who dines, plays, and shops here is able to afford in Bellevue, and so it's really important that we hear their voice too. Ultimately, who decides what's in the plan is going to be our city council. They're the ultimate actor on this, and so we will take information that we get from both Bellevue residents and folks who don't live here but may want to create those recommendations, and our council will deliberate on them.
Okay.
How is that data presented?
Okay, we should.
How is that weighted? People who don't live here as opposed to the residents who lived here and are developing the strategy with the city?
That's a great question, and I don't think it's necessarily a mathematical equation where we weight certain input. What we really do is we look across the input we hear and we try and identify who have we heard from, who haven't we heard from, and then trying to look at the themes across those different things. So it's not necessarily we group Bellevue residents over here and non-Bellevue residents over here, but I hear what you're saying. You want to make sure that Bellevue residents have a strong voice in this.
Okay. We definitely have a bunch of questions coming in online, so I want to make sure that we get to them. And these are maybe some things that are related to specific programs and qualifications. One person says they are currently struggling with their rent and have a son with intellectual disabilities. Are there affordable housing currently for children with disabilities that go to an evergreen transition program?
That is a question that I'm not sure I would be able to respond to off of the top of my head. I know that we have certain units in Bellevue who are targeted for folks with intellectual developmental disabilities. I think, again, the question is, are there available units that might be an option for those folks? Do you have anything to add, Sabrina?
There are some developments that will be coming online in the future, and we will advertise them. I could not speak right now to whether they would specifically serve this family's needs, but it's something that we would be happy to follow up on, and there will be more information about upcoming construction.
Yeah, usually, go ahead, please. For folks who are looking for housing for specific ability levels, there are some nonprofits in King County, like the ARC of King County and other organizations that can assist with housing navigation. So if you do have questions about housing navigation or how to find affordable housing, feel free to follow up with us either in person or by emailing housing@bellevuewa.gov, and we can get you connected to the next step in navigation. We're not the folks who provide that, but we want to make sure you get connected to resources.
We have also a couple questions online related to the affordable housing strategy and the city council's budgeting process. So, I think how will this process influence budgeting in future years? And then people also are interested, is there actually budget within the city council to make this plan a reality to implement?
Yeah, so currently the amount, like as I mentioned, we have money to do the planning work we're doing right now. The cost of actually meeting our affordable housing goal, it's really high. Just to build those 0 to 30% AMI units, in total, it's about $2 billion in 10 years. And so we know we do not have that money within the city budget right now. We do know that there are ways that we can look to new revenue sources and to use our existing funds to leverage other dollars. The city rarely and will likely never be the only funder for an affordable housing project. We put in a small portion of money so that we can get the county, the state, and the federal government to also put money in, and that's how we leverage our dollars to go further. And so to answer the question, do we have the money to be able to implement this plan? No, not at this time, but part of our work is to identify how we can find those resources.
So I have one question that asks what the difference is between ARCH and this program. And if I am interpreting correctly, this person is asking between ARCH's rental housing program. And if that's incorrect, please let me know. But I did get another question asking about how we work regionally, so it might be an opportunity to speak to both.
Great. So ARCH is a organization that works with cities on the east side on their housing efforts. ARCH stands for a Regional Coalition of Housing, and they actually help cities monitor and fill their affordable housing after we've built it. And so they work across different cities on the east side to help us manage our affordable housing and to fund it. And so they are a great organization to bring folks together. So it's not just Bellevue who's trying to fix affordable housing within our community, but it's all of the east side who are investing together to make affordable housing happen. If a project gets built across Bellevue's boundary in Redmond, we're still really excited about that. That's still affordable housing in our community, and that's really the purpose of ARCH, is to make that coordination happen. In terms of the difference between the City of Bellevue's work and ARCH, is we do support their work, and we're looking to that regional lens to make sure that we're working with all of our partners. But this is a City of Bellevue affordable housing strategy, and it's really going to be focusing on city actions. I mentioned we have some resources available. ARCH does have a lot of housing resources, and they publish information on projects within Bellevue and other East Side communities that offer affordable housing. So we have a list available, or if you go to arch.org, you can find a list of their rental housing properties in Bellevue and across the East Side. So if you're interested in applying for them, you'd be able to have that contact information and those qualifications.
Great. We also continue to have a little bit of question about like calculating affordability and things like that. And so this person says, there are many ways people have trouble reaching housing. On paper, a woman might look like she is above AMI. However, she's a single mother and works 3 jobs and is paying out 50% of her income on childcare. This would end up taking her below the minimum AMI. So how do those kinds of other costs get factored into determining AMI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we see in especially the East King County market is that housing is so expensive here that even folks who may not traditionally qualified for that income restricted affordable housing still might not be able to afford housing on the market. And so there are folks who work 3 jobs, maybe they are above the area median income, and yet you can't find an apartment that's going to meet your needs in Bellevue. And so in terms of how we think about that, we don't necessarily talk about it from an AMI perspective, but in this strategy, as I mentioned, we are thinking about the income restricted affordable housing, but we're also thinking about affordability of the market in general. We know there's a lot of people who won't qualify for affordable housing who still need housing that's affordable to them.
And then just kind of a follow-up on AMI, since that number changes year to year, if somebody sort of qualified at one point and then don't qualify, do they lose their affordable housing once they're in it?
Yeah, so that is going to be specific to the program or project that you actually live in. And so in most cases, there are provisions for you to be able to make more income and stay in your affordable housing for a certain period of time. So I think we're all very cognizant. We don't want people to have to keep making low income so they can stay in their home. We want people to have success opportunities to be able to grow. And so it does depend on your specific kind of unit and qualifications, whether, how they would respond to a change in income. But frequently what we're seeing is it's set up so that you'd be able to increase your income and stay in that unit at least for a certain period of time.
So we did have a question about the affordable housing target.
Okay.
So what does unrestricted mean for the 8,300 houses for 80% AMI?
Great question. So I had shown a nice arrow, and I pointed out the affordable units, that 5,700 number. There were still 8,300 units sitting out there that aren't supposed to be affordable. That is the housing that we're planning to grow by. That's just market rate. It's not restricted to any income. Anyone would be able to apply for that unit, and they would set their own rents. So that is housing that we're expecting to come online, but it wouldn't necessarily be affordable housing. So not restricted to an income, it would be unrestricted.
And then we do have a policy question.
Great.
So 95% of the state of Washington is undeveloped according to the Urban Land Institute. You had a display about historically marginalized communities, marginalized via racist zoning laws. Why not allow past marginalized communities to build low-cost housing outside of the current urban growth boundary so they too can own affordable single-family houses and build their wealth?
Yeah, so the Growth Management Act is established by the state. So the rules around how you plan for development within or outside of that urban growth boundary would be something that the state decides. And historically, what we've seen is a preference for kind of keeping the UGA where it's at and developing within it. So at the local level, we don't have the planning authority to be able to take an action like that. That would be at the state level.
Great. We have a question from the landlord perspective.
Great.
As a small landlord who might be redeveloping their single lot in Bellevue, who would they work with at the city to understand affordable incentive qualifications? Do they work with Arch? Do they work with the Office of Housing or the Development Services Department, or all of them?
Yeah, the great starting point is the Development Services Department. They're the folks who are going to be able to walk you through what you're able to develop on your property, and they're very well versed in our incentive programs as well. For some of our incentive programs, they may refer you over to Arch to be able to understand all of those program qualifications. But the starting point, go into your current planner, talk to Development Services, and they'll give you a sense of, what you might be able to do with our existing affordability incentives.
So we have a question about data. How to keep track of renters of affordable housing annually? So how does the city keep track? Do we keep track?
Of what in affordable housing?
Oh, I'm sorry, renters of affordable housing.
So the city doesn't maintain information on occupants of affordable housing. Arch, which I had mentioned, is the organization that helps monitor our affordable units in the city. They do have some information on households and the household incomes and how much rent they pay within those units. But that is really for compliance monitoring to make sure that those units are being occupied by the right people and they are paying the right rent.
All right. This is sort of policy related, or what we might be covering in our plan. This person says it's preferable to have residents stay in their existing homes, including those that are maybe getting older or aging. How can we help people retain their houses that they currently in and maintain affordability?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple of ways to think about that. But the one I'll speak to is about some ongoing work that the city is doing around middle housing. So there has been some new state legislation around allowing middle housing types in Bellevue. And so we're revising our code to allow more different types of housing in single family areas. How that relates to aging in place is we're going to be thinking about how to have accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units be available on single family homes. And so we're looking at options to allow folks who might want to age in place to maybe subdivide their home, create an attached accessory dwelling unit. They can live over there, they can rent out the other half. So we're looking at some options through the middle housing program about how folks could be able to retain the asset they have, maybe configure it a little bit differently so they'd be able to age on that property and still have that asset that they can utilize.
And just as a follow-up that, since you brought up ADUs or maybe some of the duplexes, triplexes that might get back, those types of middle housing, where do they fit into the affordability landscape? Are they actually affordable under a more a specific income restricted program, or where do they fit in?
Yeah, so middle housing could be affordable or it could be unrestricted. We most likely see it being built as unrestricted housing. And what we're seeing in East King County is these are smaller housing types. So when you compare it to a larger single family home, it is more affordable than that big home. In terms of what we're looking at in terms of affordability, they are still priced above 100% AMI. So they are an option for some middle income folks, and it's going to be a great option for them to be able to utilize. It's very unlikely that somebody who makes below median income is going to be able to afford one of those new unrestricted middle housing units, just based on a pure income measure.
So I have another policy question. Can you discuss affordable housing plans for our public Bellevue School District teachers to keep them living near where they work?
Yeah, this is really important, and we have been talking and working with the school district about how do we think about our not just our teachers and the school workforce, but the families who attend our school and making sure that they can afford to live here and that new families can afford to move here so that we have enrollment within our school. And so this is something that we have heard from the Bellevue School District as something they're really interested in partnering with the city on. And so we have had some discussions with them about what resources does the school district have, does the city have, and how can we use those creatively for affordable housing?
Can I just piggyback on that, because there's I think, a related question where somebody is also asking about our first responders, and again, another kind of part of our workforce that may be struggling to also find housing, much like our teachers and school staff. So, will this plan address those needs as well?
Yeah, I think that is going to be something that we're looking at within this strategy. And one thing I just wanted to share as an example is some work that the school district is currently doing. They're actually partnering with some affordable housing developers in Bellevue to actually have us basically a master lease on some of those units so that they can be occupied by school teachers at the Bellevue School District. And so there are some creative options like that to say, we have developers who are building in the city. Is there a way that we can make sure that some of those units go to our essential workforce?
And just if I can, but again, because we're sort of on like different populations and their needs, there is also a question online about the needs of older adults, senior citizens. And so we've talked about some of our workforce needs, but what about the needs of older adults who might be on a fixed income? How is this plan going to consider their needs?
Yeah, so we definitely talked about, needing more housing units that are affordable for very low incomes, folks who are on fixed incomes that are not going to grow and they're going to stay the same, maybe not at the pace of inflation. And so part of this plan is just making sure there are more of those units available. The other thing that I'll add to that is we want to make sure that those units are not just available, but they are designed so older adults and folks of all abilities are going to be able to live there and utilize them. So one of the things that we're thinking about in this plan is not just affordable units, but how do we incorporate universal design and inclusive design so that people with varying needs will be able to live in those units and have those needs met.
So we have a question here about how we define affordable. So I am paraphrasing two questions, but the first question is, how did the city decide on using 30% of income for housing in a budget? Some banks allow slightly higher for mortgages. And then this card specifically asks, how can we call $1,500 a month for rent affordable?
Yeah, so the first part about how we decided on 30% of your income, that being affordable, this is a kind of a standard threshold that we use in housing. So that 30%, that's actually something that the Department of Housing and Urban Development uses as well. And sometimes we hear people say, well, I can spend 40% of my income on housing and I'd be okay. Well, oftentimes those people have more income, and so they have more income left over that they can spend on their housing. So we do see in some cases, 35%, 40% may be doable for households, but that 30% measure really is where we see for below median income households being able to have enough money to cover those other expenses. You give me two parts and then I forget.
No, it's okay. The second question was a little bit more.
Oh, the
it's-
1,500, yes. So I think the key and one of the takeaways I hope you get from this conversation is that affordable is always dependent on the income that you make and how much money you have to spend on housing costs. So for a lot of people, $1,500 might be too much. That might not be affordable. For other people who have more income, that might be. And so that's why we do use those kind of qualifiers like the area median income to be able to say, well, this is what we think you should be able to afford, and this is what we think you should be able to afford based on your income.
Great. We have, again, just more about people who might be looking for affordable housing and who gets priority. Are there specific criteria? Like if you need affordable housing, how are you getting access or to a list, and what are, again, criteria maybe other than income that might be considered as well?
Yeah, so this is going to be dependent on who is placing you within an affordable unit, but I can speak to some things that are sometimes used. So oftentimes it is a first come, first serve kind of situation. There is a waiting list, and they go down the waiting list, and the next person who qualifies, they are the person who gets put into that unit. There are also some other models where maybe you do get priority for certain things, like maybe if you live in Bellevue, you get priority because we want to make sure that people who live in Bellevue stay in Bellevue. So it really does depend on the project and how they are filling those units. So I wouldn't be able to answer that concretely.
So we have a question here about, it's related to policy, but generally development. So how is the city making sure that there are checks and balances in the implementation of a project, of a development project? Like, how do you make the development work for everybody? How do you ensure that there's enough parking in the building for all of the residents, enough units at certain income levels? I believe this is what the question is going for.
Yeah, so in terms of that kind of overarching community vision, we get a lot of that direction from our comprehensive plan. They're going to give us the guidance about what things are really important in the community and what we should prioritize within our policy work. And so we do see that within our new comprehensive plan, housing is a big priority, but we also have other things that are important to the city, like open space and sustainability. And so as we think about bringing development projects online, we do have to look at what is that vision that was set in the comprehensive plan, and then how can we balance all of those objectives within an actual project.
I just want to do a time check. So we're just about 10 minutes before our scheduled end. So we definitely have time for some more questions, but also want to make sure that you, Hannah, have time to do any final words. So just putting that out there to keep us on track. I do have an online question related to the goals of this plan, and is a goal or the goal of this work to help people who can't afford to live in Bellevue find a home in Bellevue?
Yes, that is definitely a goal of this project. Our target includes needs that are not only the Bellevue community, but about people who are going to be moving here in the future. And so while we definitely want to make sure that there's affordable housing for folks that already live here, we know there are people who work here, who can't live here, who are driving in 45 minutes, and it is a priority for us to increase options for those folks to also have a choice to live in Bellevue.
Great. I have another question, and this is maybe related to things like inclusionary zoning. So maybe you can also talk a little bit, define that. But this person says, are builders allowed to make a one-time payment to the city to avoid having any low-cost units in their building? This has happened in the past. If this is allowed, why is it permitted? So I think if you can talk a little bit about what inclusionary zoning is and why we might have what a fee in lieu and that, and why we might allow that or need to have that.
Yeah, this is a great question. So Inclusionary zoning usually refers to a mandatory inclusionary zoning program. And basically what that means is for new development that's coming online, they're required to include a percentage of affordable units. Some other East Side communities have mandatory programs. In Bellevue, currently, we do not have a mandatory inclusionary zoning program. And so to that question, would we allow that fee payment? Currently, that's not set up in Bellevue, but there is some ongoing work that are looking at affordable housing programs in Bellevue and inclusionary zoning as part of the Wilburton Vision LUCA. So there are some conversations that are happening right now with our planning commission, and those will go on to our council later this year, that are talking about whether that's appropriate in Bellevue and what that should look like. As part of that work, they are looking at a fee in lieu, which is what the commenter mentioned. And this is basically saying, if we require you to provide affordable housing, maybe we also give you the option to pay instead of providing it on site. So it's a way that the city can collect revenue and money and support other affordable housing projects, but the developer wouldn't necessarily deal with putting it on that property.
My last two questions are specific questions. One generally answered about applying for affordable housing and how long can I live in affordable housing. Where would somebody find the answers to those questions generally?
Yeah, the first place that I would direct you to is arch.org. They are going to have the most up-to-date information about affordable housing units in Bellevue, about the area median income and how to qualify for those units. And they have a really great staff. If you give them a call, they can talk you through some of that qualification process and some of the questions like, how long can I live in that unit?
All right, we have, I think, a question that we get asked quite frequently. There are many older neighborhoods in Bellevue. These older neighborhoods have homes that are often maybe more affordable for families. However, these homes are being torn down at record levels and then mega houses built on them, taking out all the trees and raising the property values of all of the other homes in the area. Are there any land use limits that could keep the amount of these homes being built to a smaller number?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think I'll point back to our middle housing work there. So one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of these big homes being built is because folks who are redeveloping these properties, they want to get the most bang for their buck. And how you do that is you build a really big, expensive home. What our middle housing LUCA is going to do is it's going to allow actually more homes to be built on that same parcel. And so we're likely going to see more smaller homes that are actually, before you couldn't develop them there, and now those are going to be new options. So we're hopeful that we'll see some new development types as options that developers want to pursue instead of just building those big big single-family homes.
We got a question about inclusionary housing. So why did inclusionary housing get started in Bellevue in 1992, but fail or end by 1995?
Yes, great question. So when I answered the mandatory inclusionary zoning question, I said we don't have it in Bellevue currently. We did have a mandatory program in Bellevue, I believe from 1991 to about 1996, that we operated across the city. I won't give my age, but I wasn't here in 1996, so I can't speak exactly to why that decision happened. Well, I would love to have a conversation with you after this about that. Yeah, that would be lovely background for me. I would love to have a conversation offline with you. That's really helpful background. But we did at that time switch from a mandatory program to a voluntary one. And what that said is you can actually get some additional density if you provide those affordable housing units. You don't have to, but it's a benefit you could get if you opted into it.
All right, I think there's a couple kind of logistics questions in
great,
here,
yeah.
and then there's also some questions, I think maybe if you can speak to some of the other projects that the city is working on. You mentioned middle housing, but people have also asked some questions related to rezoning things. So can you talk about or kind of let people know, like, if you want to track these other projects that the
Yeah.
city is working around rezoning and neighborhood centers and middle housing, how that is. And then, so you can talk about that. And then I have one more kind of like plan focus question and then
Yeah.
a couple logistic questions.
Great. Well, this is a great prompt for me to go to this slide. So we will distribute this after after this presentation to folks who registered. So I love taking the photos, but you'll also get this so you can get the links as well. So these are 3 ongoing projects that our development and code team is working on at the city right now. So this is the middle housing work I mentioned. I also had spoken about the Wilburton work. And then another project that's ongoing is this housing opportunities in mixed use areas, which is looking at potential density increases in mixed use areas across the city. So this is work that's ongoing. If you want to plug in, there are websites on the city website, and I put our project contacts on there as well. So feel free to shoot them a question, ask them about what's going on and how you can get involved in that work that's happening.
We have a policy-related question. Generally, will there be policies or incentives for builders to build smaller homes, studios, and one-bedrooms for purchase, not for rent?
So one of the things that we actually see as a challenge with for rent multifamily is some of the condo liability laws that exist in Washington. And so we actually see developers not very likely to develop multifamily condo or like apartments that you can buy because of that liability and risk that's going on. Currently, the state legislature is going on, and they're actually thinking about that issue and how they can make that liability more balanced for developers and the condo owners. And so, is that something we're thinking about? Yes, there are some barriers to it, and we're trying to think about how we can get around those.
All right, we have a question maybe sort of related to displacement. So we find many people who have grown up in Bellevue, who live their adult life, who, as maybe they've gotten older, they have found themselves displaced out of Bellevue. Will this plan kind of address any of those people who have specifically been displaced from Bellevue to come back to the city?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a really important consideration as we talk about, who should be informing this plan and who needs to be involved in it. We actually have folks who used to live in Bellevue who don't live here anymore because of affordability issues. And so while we're not necessarily thinking about how to develop housing units specifically for those displaced persons, I think the intent is that we want to make sure that there's more opportunities for folks who don't live here or perhaps used to live here to be able to come back.
Those were all of the card questions.
Great. So I think to close this out, we have a couple of questions that are maybe related to process here. So maybe you can remind folks maybe sort of the overall timeline for this project, maybe if we know specific phases, and any specific ways that people who are listening in or here in the room with us who want to be involved, to provide feedback, how can they get involved?
What a great tee up for my ending slides, Brooke. So first off, I'll just go back to our kind of overall timeline. So we are still pretty early on in this process. We're just in our launch phase, and so this work is going to continue until about November this year. For the next couple of months, we're really focused on getting the word out, having info sessions, and as I'll share in just a moment, we're going to have some education events for the community as well. Starting in about April is when we start to get into that analytical and assessment work. So that's when we're going to be digging into what are the impacts of the different actions that we could potentially take at the city, and then based on that, which ones do we want to actually go forward with? So that work is going to be happening from about April to September. And during that time, as I mentioned, we're going to have some more information sessions, an online open house, and more opportunities for you to learn about what we're considering and to give some feedback to us as well. And so that also just leads us perfectly into how do you stay involved? I don't want to come back in November when council is considering this. I want to be involved through this whole process. And guess what? We want you to be involved too. So as I mentioned, we are planning some additional events for this spring. Starting in March and throughout April, we are planning an education series. Our first event is going to be on March 6th at City Hall. And actually, we're going to be hosting a Better Cities Film Festival. So we have the opportunity to watch short films of communities across the United States and the world who actually have been addressing housing affordability and community building within their own cities. And so we're going to have this awesome night where we get to see all of the amazing work that other places are doing, and then have a conversation about, what can we learn from that and what can we do in Bellevue? We're also planning 2 more education events after that for April. We are still finalizing some of those details, so those dates may change, but we're thinking that we'll have like a Housing 101 and a panel of folks who actually are involved in housing in Bellevue. So there are going to be some future opportunities for you to learn a little bit more and interact with some folks who are actually key players in the Bellevue community. And then lastly, if you're not sure you can make those events, but you want to make sure you know what's happening, please go to our online engagement hub called Engaging Bellevue. I have a link here. I believe Tun's going to drop it in the chat. You can subscribe in the top left of that screen to make sure that you get updates about what's happening. And if you say, I have a comment, there was a question that I really wanted to ask that I didn't get to, or maybe I didn't answer the question you asked very well, please let us know. Reach out to us at housing@bellevuewa.gov. I'll also have my email on this final screen. We want to hear from you. We want to make sure you're involved, so please don't hesitate to reach out, and we can have a continued conversation with you all.
Great. Well, thank you to everybody who joined in person, online, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and engaging with you over the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, y'all.